This is the introductory After Effects lesson for the IMP training, and I'm Tina LeBaron. When you open up After Effects, you're going to probably start with this window. If not, you might just see the display already. If you don't though, go to here, and we can all start a new project. You can choose where it saves by doing your File, Save As. When you open up After Effects, you'll notice it's mostly a compositing program. There are some objects you can generate in After Effects, but for the most part we're going to be loading and importing in our objects and then editing them on a timeline. For this first lesson, we're not going to import anything though, so I'll show you what is native to the program. We're going to go ahead and do New Composition, and we can set that to be that 1920 by 1080. That's your preset HD 1920 by 1080 and 29.97 FPS. You remember 29.97 and 30 are essentially the same thing. They are just your NTSC standard. One's a little more technically accurate. We could also work in PAL, or we could work in film if we wanted, but let's start in that NTSC. This background color is just what you'll see on the stage. It doesn't actually export. We'll set the resolution at full to see at first, and we can have square pixels. If we wanted advanced settings, we would be able to change things like the motion blur or 3D render settings. We're not going to get that far yet. What you'll see now is in your Comp 1, you see this timeline area with nothing in it, and you'll see this black display. What I want to show today is just entering text and then some of the basic animation tools. Your text tool is going to be right here. You also have a shape generator, but know that this might default. If we wanted to make a background color for our title scene, we could do that by putting this text layer on and changing the color. We have a stroke, we have a fill. So let's go ahead and make a nicer background color. And we can adjust that by going to our select and just dragging the edges and resizing it. If you notice that drag effect is coming out of the center of it, that's because this is where our anchor point is. And anchor points are incredibly important in After Effects. It's going to dictate how the object moves, what it rotates around, all of that. You can hit different button combinations. Alt will do a copy of it. If I do Shift, that'll help resize it so that it's not uniform. And Control won't resize it, it just moves it around. From here, if I knew I wanted this layer to be there permanently, I might rename it. Instead of being like Shape Layer 1, I can rename to Background. I also have a lock icon here, so I could click lock, and now I won't accidentally select that anymore. Now I can grab my type tool, and if you click and hold down, you'll notice you have the option for horizontal and vertical text. And when you select this, your character menu over here should open. This is what will allow you to change it from any type of font you want. And anything that's loaded in your Adobe library should be accessed here. So if you load in a new font in Adobe Creative Cloud, you should be able to then access it in Adobe After Effects. We also have the size and a bunch of other options that I'll show you how to change after we get it in there. Since we're ultimately working on a character animation, I'll go ahead and type in what I know we're going to make. And now I have a bunch of different settings I can use for this. So selecting this either by using my text tool and clicking and dragging it, or just highlighting the text, I should be able to go through and change my font. I think I can also select and use the up and down arrows if I wanted to see what the different fonts look like. As long as that text is highlighted, that should work. I can change my font size by going through here and clicking. If I wanted it to be a larger font size, I can actually either just click and drag the number as large or as small as I want. With that text tool, I could also go back in and click Enter and put it on 2 lines. If I have 2 lines, I can change these settings, which are going to be, hopefully, I can change these settings, which are the spacing between my line widths. We can also do things like, if I decided I wanted this to be a subscript or a superscript, I can click part of it, and it would change it to a subscript, a superscript. I can do small caps, I can do all caps. You don't have to retype that. Just clicking those options will go through and change your character font for you. If you want it back to how it was, just unselect them all and it will go back to the defaults. How you animate in After Effects is that you're going to hit the caret next to your layer name. I'm going to skip the text settings for now and go right to transform. This is what I was talking about with your anchor point, and this is the very first thing you want to adjust. Clicking on your font will show you that your anchor point is right over here. What that means is that if I were to change something like the scale of this, you're going to notice the scale changes based on the anchor point. This might be a great anchor point if I wanted to do something like have it pop out on just one axis, like the X. If I decided I wanted it to come out like that, I could. But if I want it to scale uniformly from a center, I would want to change that anchor point. You always think, okay, well, I should just click and drag the anchor point and it moves the whole object. Traditionally, most tutorials will have you just move or drag the numbers so that the anchor point is where you want it. And then from there, you can kind of recenter your object. Now you have more settings in Paragraph if you really wanted this to be lined up. So if I decided I wanted this to be centered, I could click on my Paragraph Center and then do my anchor point. There are some shortcuts you can do to get kind of quicker with this and more efficient. You can also change where everything is based on the position. And you should also have alignment options. I don't think they're open right now, but we can go to Window and Alignment. If I decided I wanted this element to be exactly centered, I could click this second Align Horizontally. I could also align vertically, and now the whole thing is centered on my stage. Once again, to add any of these type of menus, you can just go to Window, and you'll find them here. There's also workspaces, so I'm on the default now. Right now, I'm just going to stay on default because that's going to give us most of the options that we'll need. Once I have this done, how you animate in After Effects is you hit the stopwatch. And you don't set keyframes by continually hitting the stopwatch. Instead, what you do is you turn the stopwatch on once. It will set an automatic keyframe wherever your current time indicator is. If you didn't know that, that's what that's called. CTI for short. And then you can go through and scale it. So if I decided I wanted this to shrink in and pop out from the center, not the best animation, but I'll show you an object. And we wanted it to happen over 2 seconds, we can go ahead and set that to 0, and then set that to 100. And now, if I were to play it, you play by hitting spacebar, you'll see the animation. Now it's a little jumpy at first, and that's because After Effects renders in real time. You're not seeing it fully rendered if this line's not green. So if I were to change something else, say I wanted to rotate this a little too, we'll make a really funky animation that I find is usually the first type my students make, is we'll click on rotation, and I could go ahead and rotate it just manually. So maybe I want it 0 here. I want to put it here and have it rotate 360 degrees. That's when you say, couldn't you have just typed it? I could, but I wanted to show you that notice the number just changed to 1. The other thing we can do, which might be a little easier, is if we want it to just rotate around once, we hit 1. If we wanted it to rotate around twice, we'd hit 2. And now when we go back and play it, there we go. Let's say we wanted to make something that was a little more traditional. We could either delete these keyframes, or if you know you want to get rid of an animation you did entirely on a row, that's when you click the stopwatch. What that will do is delete every keyframe and take it out of animation mode. A lot of my students accidentally hit that, thinking they're hitting a keyframe, and they erase all their animation. If you wanted to add a keyframe, what you would actually do is the Add Keyframe button is right here. So just know the difference between those two buttons. I, however, am going to get rid of my rotation animation and do a pretty standard opacity animation. I'll go ahead and say it's 0 for the first second, or the start. And then at around 1 second, if I want to get it exactly to 1 second, I could go over here and manually type in 1 second. I'll go ahead and put that opacity back up at 100. And it should auto add the keyframe. Once again, if it didn't, I can click here to add or remove a keyframe. And here we go. Now, you'll notice something, that even though I don't have the rotation animating, it's still a little off. It didn't get rid of all my settings because I turned off the animation when it wasn't set at 0. So I can change that by going through, just manually typing 0, and that'll fix my rotation. And if I wanted something really traditional, maybe I wouldn't even want the scale. I could take that out, and now I should have just an incredibly standard fade in. And in that case, it might be easier to just do it in Premiere, but know you have options. You don't have to animate just by using the composition settings. Let me go ahead and I'll take off all the animation I did, put that back at 0. You have effects and presets. And in your effects and presets, they have a lot. So if I wanted like a pixelation, I could go ahead and click and say, oh, hey, here's a pixel motion blur. I could drop that on. What most of my students tend to like is when the type writes itself out, and that's actually called a typewriter. So I'm going to click the typewriter by searching up here, just type typewriter, click and drag, and now what should happen is when I play, that will type out. If you notice, the start and end points are right here, and it applied right where I had my cursor. If I wanted it to start at the beginning, I would just put my time, my current time indicator at the beginning, drag on that typewriter, and change it there. You could go through and edit these as well by, on that animation, let's go ahead and click our text, our animate, and we'll find Animator 1. Animator 1 is what it's calling our typewriter effect. Right now, the opacity isn't changing, the range isn't changing, but we have a start and an end, and this is where we can change some of those effects. If we decided we wanted it to maybe start a couple frames in, we could just drag those. And we can also change the speed it's typing out by changing that end keyframe. Once you're done your animation, you can export it and know that right now we have a 30-second animation going. If we knew we wanted that shorter, we could go to our composition settings, or right-click and go to composition settings. Both menus are the same. And we can put our start time and our end time. I normally give this a little more export, so if I knew I wanted like a 5-second opening animation, I'll normally export it as 10, so if I want, I can clip it down. And so I put it at 10 seconds. This will also give me some area to crossfade. I go to export, and I go to add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. I do that just so that my students get familiar with Adobe Media Encoder, since everything does export to this. Normally you have to give it a minute to generate in here. It will appear. It's going to default as an H.264. That's what I want. That's, HTML5 standard. I click my digital output. I can call this and then hit play. From there, it's exported. It says it's done. If you wanted, you could click on the title. It will open the Finder window, and you could watch it. Magnificent, right? And that's our first intro lesson on how to use Adobe After Effects. Next time in our intermediate, we'll cover character animation.